We'll start in about 2 minutes. Let people get on.
Which sicha, the first or the second?
We're learning the second. Actually, I gave a shiur on the sicha on the first one, and in Hebrew, to Israel, it's a group.
The sicha itself is in Lashon Kodesh. It must be easier.
For me, it's harder. I'll tell you why. Because when I read it, I have to read it in the Vrit.
The Vrit, yeah.
And my tongue doesn't twist that way. Then how to say it in Hebrew? My Hebrew is schwach. And then when it's reading, so like this, you read it in Yiddish, whatever it is. Here in Hebrew, I had to read it the way it's.
You have words. Yeah, the words are on the page.
Yeah, the words are there. Yeah, but you gotta pronounce it. Hebrew.
Right.
That's not the. To me, it doesn't go good. It doesn't flow. Okay.
Were you at the chuppah tonight, Label?
Yeah.
There's a big crowd.
Yeah, but not out of this world. Crowd. But then it's only for the chuppah. Then for the meal, this mom is just for relatives.
Yeah.
Under the circumstances nowadays.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I think we've waited the 2 minutes. We could start. So this is talking about a posik in Parshas Vayero, where the Torah tells us the Malachim came to Avraham, and then they left from Avraham to destroy Sdom. And David just said, how could I not tell Avraham what I'm going to do with Sdom? So Hashem spoke to Avraham and he said, I hear what's going on in Sdom, I'm going to see what I could do about it. Then the pasuk continues. The Anoshim Malachim went to Sdom. And Avraham was still standing in front of Hashem. Then the pasuk says, Vayigash Avraham. Avraham got closer. He came closer. He approached. And he said, Ha'aftis betzadik im Rosha. Will you destroy a tzaddik with a Rosha? And then he went on with what he was saying. So here the Rebbe starts off the sicha like this. Ala pasuk Vayigash Avraham vayemer ha'aftis betzadik. And this pasuk where it says that Avraham approached and he said to Hashem, will you destroy a tzaddik with Nerosha? And he went on pleading with what he said. The Farash Rasha explains it like this. First, Rasha quotes from the pasuk the two words, Vayigash Avraham. We know the Rebbe is always medayik, that the Dibur HaMaschil has to do with the Pshat. And his Rasha only quotes from the pasuk those words which are important to his Pshat. So here Rasha quotes two words from the pasuk, Vayigash Avraham. Rasha says like this, Matzinu Hagosha L'Muchama, we find that the word Vayigash, Hagosha, to approach, we find that an expression in the Torah used when you're approaching for war. Vayigash Yeyav. There's a pasuk that says Yeyav approached, and the pasuk means that he went to war. Then we find it's a pasuk, Hagosha Lepius. We also find that the Torah uses the Hagosha, the word that he approached when he's going to appease. And that we find by Vayigash of Yehuda. That Yehuda got close to Yosef when he was trying to speak about Binyamin. So it says Vayigash, and Rashi says he approached to discuss with him to appease him. And then we find also in the Torah the word Vayigash Hagosha L'Tfilah. He approached to daven. Where do we find that? Vayigash Eliyahu Hanovi. It says Eliyahu Hanovi approached, and then he went to daven. Well, l'chol eila nichnas Avraham, and Avraham went into. In other words, he approached David that he went to all three things. The daber koshes, he was ready. He went in to speak harshly, which is like a milchama, ulepius, to appease the Eibishter, uletfilah to daven to the Eibishter. This is Pasha, the simple words of Rashi. Dr. Rabbi Azad, hina lechura kavanas Rashi. Lechura, if you're going to look at Rashi, what is Rashi trying to tell us? Rashi means like this. Since we find in the further psukim, Shavram Avinu diber koshes, we find that Avraham spoke to the Eibishter harsh words. Which words do we find that? He said to the Eibishter, Ha'aftis, the first words that he said, Ha'aftis betzadik im Rosha. That's pretty harsh words. But you're going to destroy a tzaddik with a Rosha is like Give him Debish Rachelik, so to speak. How could you do such a thing? Give him the, so that's Dibra Koshes. He also spoke Dibra Pius, words of appeasement. Look further, it says, Khalil, he said to Debish, Khalil Lechom Aseis Kadover Azeh. It's Khalil, Chas v'Sholom, we should do such a thing. Okay, Pirish Rasha says, Chuln Liloch. He's trying to explain to Debish it's Chuln. So the first one sounds to be more like Dibra Koshes. I imagine when he said the words Hav Tispe, he probably said it in a tone like that. Hav Tispe Tzadikim Roshe. How do you do that? And when he said the words Khalil Lechom Aseis Kadover Azeh, he probably spoke it in a nice way. Khalil, something like this you could do. It's not nice. And then also we find that he's followed. He davened. He said the words in Inoi Alti L'Daber. He says, I tried speaking to you, I'm dust, I'm sand, I'm nothing, and I'm still asking you, maybe even if there be less tzaddikim, still you should, etc., etc. So since we find later on that he spoke to the Eibishter harsh words of appeasement and tefillah, Lochem Mefarish, Rasha says here, the kol zeh nichla b'masha omar krov vayigash. All these type of things are included in the word vayigash, which is like an introduction to what he did. Why? Because kimetzina hagosha, we find that hagosha b'negeya dibur koshes, we find hagosha b'apiyus, and we find hagosha b'negeya tefillah. I just want to mention that in the orders we see that some of Forshim learn different psukim are included in these different sections. The Rebbe says here, dibur koshes is Hav Tispe, the dibur piyus is Chalil Lecho, and the tefillah is in Inoi Alti. Other Meforshim point out the different psukim, and the Rebbe says in the orders that this is, it means kashes. These are the psukim that it means. But what Rashi is telling us, since we see that he spoke these three things, so Rashi says that when the posuk starts off the conversation by saying Vayigash Avraham, in that word Vayigash is hinted all these three. But the Rebbe says, you have to understand. Number one, Teva Regilu b'Tanach Pshuto Vayigash. The word Vayigash is rogil, is common in Tanakh. It's a portion of the words. Lama b'chlal zukuk l'pirish. Why do you need the pirish? The klal is Rashi does not explain a posik unless it needs a pirish, unless it's something that's not clear in the posik in derech hapshat. What are not understood with the word vayigash? Vayigash Avraham got closer. What's the problem? Most places where the posik says vayigash, Rashi doesn't have to explain it. Why? Because it's self-understood. It's a Lashon Kedesh word, and everyone knows what it means. What's the problem with the word that Rashi has to come and tell us? Second thing, if Rashi is going to explain what the word vayigash means for some reason, and how it includes all the things he said later, so Rashi is only explaining what vayigash is. Why does Rashi quote from the posuk also the word vayigash Avraham? That Avraham did this. Third kasha. What is Rashi adding at the end of the piece? He says, after he quotes where we find the three ideas in Hagosha, Rashi adds, and to all these, to all three, Avram entered. As we said before, we look at the psukim, we see that he did these three things. So obviously that's what he did. So why does Rashi have to add, after he says that Hagosha includes all these three things, Rashi adds, and all these three things he went into. It's extra words. He should have said Hagosha includes these three things. And then when you learn the psukim, you see exactly that's what he did. Dalet, the fourth shaila. Rashi magdim heichocha dechol eilan nichnas chulu. Rashi starts off, gives an introduction that Avram entered into all these three things, and the Raya brings mizeh from that shematzinu Hagosha lemilchama lepiyus u'letfilah. That we find different psukim, and that the word Hagosha means he went to Milchama, which is the same idea as harsh, being harsh, fighting, and to appease, and also to daven. So the Rebbe asks, why does Rashi have to say that he did these three things? Because we find Hagosha includes these three things. That's not how we know. We know because that's what he did. And if Rashi wouldn't bring Rayas, Rashi could have said, Vayigash, he entered for all these three things. Why? Because we see these three things that he did. That's what he did. Why do we need the ayahs? That from Psukim we see that the word Hagosha includes that. Rashi should have started right away without bringing the other places. He should have said right away, Legimel, Dvorim, Nichnas Avram. Avram entered three things, like Koshes, these three things. And now Derech Shapiro Rashi Lekam and Parsha Vayishlach. Like Rashi says in Vayishlach when the Geila Yankev Avinu. There Rashi also says, his kinatzmi, he prepared himself when he was going to get to meet Esav, he prepared himself to three things: l'deiran, to give him a present, which is similar basically to appeasement, and to tefillah, and to Muhammad, to daven and to fight with him. Rasha doesn't bring psukim, but this word means all three. He just tells it what happened. Why? Because that's what we see happen. So B'meila, why does Rasha here have to bring rayas that the word Hagosha includes these three things? Just tell us that that's what he did because we see it. Even he'll say, maybe Rasha wants to say that the word Vayigash fits to these three things, and he wants to show how it's included in the word Vayigash. At least if he wants to bring such a raya, it should be the secondary thing. First thing is, how do we know he went into these three things? Because that's what he did. Don't need any rayas in the word Hagosha. If you need some reason how it fits to the Hagosha, so then you'll say, and also fits to the word Hagosha, because we find by Hagosha these three things. Why is that the first thing Rashi says? Fifth kasha. Yidoch, on the other hand, so some Rashi, the late Pirish, till now was a kasha, he says things that he didn't have to. He says that Hagosha includes all three, which really he didn't have to say that. He just should have said that he did these three things because we see it. He didn't have to bring that. So Rashi writes something extra. Now the kasha is the opposite. Something that he should have said, he doesn't say. He asked something he says he didn't have to say. Here he says the opposite. Really, what Rashi should have brought when he talks about Avraham entering in these three things, he should have brought the psukim where we see he said it. The pasuk Chalil, which is the pasuk of Tius, all these psukim. There we see it. He did all these three things because we see he actually did it. So that we see he actually did it, that Rashi doesn't bring, that he should have brought. What does he bring? A side thing, we are ayah for the word Hagosha. It's like a bishul tzvishna yotzres. It should be in the opposite. And Valderech shematzinu bepirusha beparsha vayishlach now. In Vayishlach we see it goes in that seder. Shuma Farash, when Rashi said that he went to the three things, Rashi says it like this. L'deiron, he went to give a present, and he quotes right away where we see that. Bataver amin chalponav, he quotes the pasuk that he sent the present to Esau. Then it says he went into Tefillah. Rashi brings, where do we see he went to Tefillah? Because he said, Elekei Avi Avraham, etc., etc. Where do we see he went to Muhammad? So he quotes, Rashi quotes what he did. He said, I'm going to fight with him, and if I get destroyed, the other one would be. So Rashi quotes these psukim. That's what Rashi should have done here. Quoted the psukim where we see Avraham did these three things. That he doesn't bring. What he does bring is the word Hagosha could include these three things. Why? Then you have a Meir Dikakasha. Kushas has sifse chachomim. It's a Meir Dik. All the Meforshim has this. Eich kos of Rashi. How does Rashi write here? The Vayigash Eid of Yehuda. Rashi quotes that we find the Vayigash, the Pius. Where do we see Vayigash is also used when you get involved in appeasing? He says because Vayigash Eid of Yehuda, hoya lepius. What's to appease him? Hare lekamen bereish Parsha Vayigash kos of Rashi. When you look at the beginning of Parsha Vayigash, Rashi writes, and the pasuk when Yehuda said to Yosef, "Val yicharapcho," he started telling him, "Don't be upset with me." He apologized. So Rashi says, "Mikana talomet shedibrei of koshes." From here we see they spoke harsh. Why did they have to apologize? He says, "I hope you won't. I hope you won't mind." But so Rashi says, from here we see the koshes. And how does Rashi say that Vayigash by Yehuda means pius, to appease? But Rashi over there says that it's not. You know what other Meforshim do? Because of the kasha, it's such a strong kasha, they say it's a mistake in the print. Rashi, when he brings Vayigash means Lepius, is not this posik. It's another posik. It's a posik where it also says Vayigash and Yehuda, but not the posik. The posik is, he quotes here before, Vayikshu b'nei Yehuda el Yeshua, posik in Yeshua. Because this posik doesn't make sense. He's contradicting himself. And the Rebbe has such a made shot here, which you have to think about it, but it's going to say it. Seventh kasha, le'ider gisa. On the other hand, here the kasha is it's a contradiction to Rashis. But on the other hand, the key Mishrashi Mefarash Kan Shagoshas Yosef Oisel, since Rashi says here that when Yosef got close, Yehuda got close to Yosef, it was for appeasement. Madua lei pirish came breish parsha vayigash. Why doesn't he taka say it there? Why doesn't he taka say it there? Befradem at sinu the nochish lafarasham kenal shedibrei of koshes. That he spoke to him, harsh Rashi says. So Rashi is trying to describe how he spoke. Yehuda spoke to Yosef. And since Rashi says here he spoke to him Divrei Piyus, should have mentioned it there too. See, if Rashi wouldn't say, describe exactly, identify the style of his speech, okay, Rashi doesn't. He does. That's why he mentions he spoke koshes. But obviously he spoke Piyus also. It's a shaila, how does it fit? But Lepel Rashi says here he spoke Piyus. Why doesn't Rashi over there also bring these spoke Piyus? And the Ches Eis Kasha, Madua Meshane Rashi Meloshon HaKosav Vayigash Avrom. Why does Rashi change from the Pasuk's word Vayigash Avrom? The case at the end he writes, Ulchol Leila Nichnas Avrom. All this he entered. Havelei Leimel Ulchol Leila Nigash Avrom. Is Rashi explaining the Pasuk Vayigash Avrom? And he's saying Vayigash means all speech. So Rashi says, and for all these, he was Nigash. He approached. Rashi only Nichnas Avrom. Why does he change? Explaining the Pasuk. Why does he change the Pasuk? So the Rebbe says Abir because there's a lot of kashas and different angles, and the teretz is mamish like a puzzle, how it fits. Shot is like this. Lifnei Vayigash Avrom, right before it says Avrom approached. Who did he approach? Who was he going to speaking here? Divrei Piyus or whatever, to the Eibishter. So Vayigash Avrom means he approached the Eibishter. But right before that, Nemer it says, a pasuk before that, it says Vavrom Eidenu Eimid Lifnei Havayeh. Eibishter spoke to Avrom, told him, Eibishter said, I have to tell Avrom what I'm planning to do. That's what he said. So I have to tell Avrom I'm going to destroy Sodom. So the Eibishter spoke to Avrom. And then the Eibishter was still standing, and Avrom was still standing there in front of the Eibishter. Harei Mefurish, so in those words itself is very clear. Shalei Zoz Avrom im Kemel Lifnei Havayeh. Says that Avrom spoke to the Eibishter and he stayed there. So he didn't move away. So according to that, you can't say Vayigash means Kipshutei. He approached him. He approached David. He was standing in front of David already from before. See, the main kasha was here. What's the problem in the pasuk? What is bothering Rashi? He's trying to explain. Now we know what is bothering him. The pasuk says Avram approached David. What does that mean? Can't say that because it says right before he spoke to David and he was still standing there. So you can't say it means hatokim imokim lomokim. Approaching means he was here and he moved further. He changed places. He got closer to the Eibishter. He was standing in front of the Eibishter. So we have to say that Muvono, Hagosha, Utnua Ruchnis. What it means is not Hagosha physically, but Hagosha means he approached, like he changed his mood. He changed his approach. He changed he entered a new phase, not the Gashmias. He went out from a certain matzav of his nefesh, a certain specific matzav, and the nichnas lematzav chodesh, and he went into a new matzav. It's like this is speaking David one mode. Now he went to another mode. Now it doesn't mean he physically walked over, but it means there was a switch. Vayigash, he came over, he changed over. This is what Rashi is saying. That Avram entered all these. Meaning, before he even actually said what he wanted to say to the Eibishter, Avram entered a new matzav. He prepared himself, he went into a mode, but now I'm going to speak to the Eibishter. Give it kosher, Piyus with tefillah. That's what Rashi changed. It's not Hagosha. He wants to say, what does Hagosha mean? Hagosha means to approach. But Rashi says, the pasuk doesn't mean he physically to approach. It means it changed him. He approached a new matzav. So Rashi wants to tell us that before he even spoke, he put himself into a new mode, and now he's going to speak to these three things. So that's why Rashi, the whole point of Rashi is the last words. See, Pashat we learn in Rashi simple pshat. Rashi means the same thing as the pasuk. That all these Avram got close. So then there's a kasha. Why did he change the word? Rebbe learns the whole point of Rashi is to tell you, not that he said these things, not that he said divrei koshas, divrei piyus, and divrei tefillah, that this was something that he did before he even said it. He put himself in that mode. That's what Rashi says, nichnas. Since Rashi is trying to tell us that what the Pasuk means with Vayigash, that he went into in the mode of these three things. The Pasuk is not trying, Rashi is not trying to tell us, Avraham spoke divrei koshes, divrei tefillah, divrei piyus. Rashi wouldn't have to say that. The Michael Mashmalon, why does Rashi tell us that? If you read the Psukim, you see it yourself. Rashi has to tell us that he spoke koshes. It says he spoke koshes. It says he spoke divrei piyus. It says he davened. So Rashi is telling that's not what he wants to say. Ela lachadesh. Rashi wants to say that to be mechadesh, that the Pasuk means shemilechatchila nichnas bekavonim atorah shadiber b'fanim elu. And the chatchila went in bekavonim this. Because you know what, as we'll see from the sicha later, it's possible sometimes you go with kavanah to do one thing. Let's say a guy wants to go, I want to speak to you nicely. But after I get into the conversation, I see that you're not listening to me. So then I decide, I'm going to bombard you. So L'churi could have been here also. Could have started one. So Rashi says the Pasuk is trying to tell us that the chatchila he went in planning to do all these three. He put himself in these three. So if that's the pshat that the Pasuk is trying to say, Rashi is explaining. The kasha was, why doesn't Rashi bring the psukim where it says that he spoke divrei piyus, divrei koshes? Now it's very understood. That's not what Rashi is trying to tell us, that you should know he spoke these three things. So what's he going to bring? These psukim? But it's not raya from these psukim. From this psukim we see that he had in mind lechatchila that he's going to do these three things, koshes, piyus, and tefillah. The Pasuk just tells us. The Pasuk tells us Rashi doesn't have to make a fuss over it. We know it says he spoke that way. We know Rashi doesn't have to tell us. But Rashi is trying to tell us that the Pasuk wants to say he l'chatchila planned to speak these three ways. He's nichlas l'chatchila. That's the prat vayigash. Omnom. But since it's so, from the psukim themselves, it's no raya that l'chatchila he planned to do this, he went into this like this, because all it says is that's what he did. In Cain, Mao Amokev Araya Lipirush is so how does Rashi Kaki get this? Okay, the word Vayigash Taka teaches us, but how does Rashi know this? Maybe Taka Vayigash means he entered with a certain mode. How do you know for all three? Maybe he only went in l'chatchila to speak to him one way, the daber koshes. And that's it. And it would make sense to say that he only entered l'chatchila to speak kosher. From what? Because that's how Avram started. Because the Rebbe learns that what words did Avram say which is kosher? Ha'af, tispet, tzadik, and rosha. And that's how he started in kosher. So why wouldn't it make sense? Avram planned to come and speak to him kosher. And later he decided, let's speak. You could speak to a person like that also. Sometimes you start, I'm going to go give it to the guy. And when you start speaking, you say, no, let me speak nicely to him also. Maybe it'll work. So maybe that's what happened. Maybe he started speaking cautious, and that's his plan. As he's talking, he added these things. So how do you know that that's what Avram planned to do? That he planned something is in the word Vayigash, because Vayigash doesn't mean that he came close. That's not pshat, because he was standing there already. So Vayigash means there's something a certain mode he put in. So he planned something. But how do you know he planned all three? So the Rashi quotes the words Vayigash Avraham umafarish, and that's why Rashi starts off. Motzinu Hagosha v'chulu. We find Hagosha for Koshas, for Muhammad. We find Hagosha for Pius and Philip. Hainu Shemiki v'shatera mesifa tera seil. Since the Torah adds these words, she'ein pirish gishim l'mokim l'mokim. The Torah adds, which is clearly that it doesn't mean that he approached physically. The Torah wants to teach us. Torah is trying to tell you he entered. There was something that he planned lechatchila to do. But such a thing, the Torah is trying to tell us. See, if the Torah would just mean that he entered to speak different koshes, that the Torah doesn't have to tell us. You read the psukim, he says, Avram spoke to the Eibishter, and he said to him, half tispe. So we know that he planned to speak kosher. That's whenever you start to speak, obviously that's what you plan to do. So the fact that he planned to speak kosher, the Torah didn't have to write the word Vayigash to teach us that. See, the Torah, the way that Rebbe is learning Vayigash, the Torah writes the extra word Vayigash to tell you that there's something that he planned. Because it doesn't mean physical, so it means something planned. What could the Torah mean to tell you he planned? To tell you that he planned to speak kosher, as the Torah wouldn't have to tell us, because that's what we see. Ubetevas vayigash. So, and since the Torah is telling you an extra word to teach you, so with these words vayigash, mi dafke v'loshen zu dafke, since the Torah uses vayigash, moving le'eza eitz nichnas l'daber. Obviously, the Torah adds this word to teach you what he planned to speak. Now, how does the word vayigash tell us what he planned? The only way we know that he spoke these three is from what it says later, but that's not raya he planned. But the Torah is trying to tell you something that he planned that you wouldn't know otherwise. Rashi said, I'll tell you. Since we find Hagosha the Milchome, the word Hagosha to war, the Pius, or the Tfilah, and he quotes psukim that we find the Loshen Vayigash. Hainu shebksuvim elu on the Meitzim. In these psukim we find Shatera mishtameshes b'Loshen Vayigash. The Torah uses the word Vayigash latayer to describe as gishose v'achona sodom v'dover, to describe a person's preparing and getting into the mode of something, a lase, so to speak, and we find it hand divrei koshes, hand divrei piyus, hand divrei tefillah. We find in different places for all three things the word Vayigash. Now, since we find it in other places that fits the word Vayigash, the locha, therefore, the needn't be done in our case. So the dover koshes ha'aftispe, to say that he spoke, that he planned. He was making himself plan to speak koshes, as he said ha'aftispe. That's not what the Torah meant to tell us. Because we would know that before the Torah wouldn't say the word Vayigash. Because that's the first words he's using. So obviously he's planning to do it. So what did the Torah come to add? Something in addition to divrei koshes. We have to say the marbe shenichnas gam lahemshich diburo of the Avram bepel. That whatever he said later was part of what he said, and it fits. But Rashi, how do I know that's what he planned? Because the Torah wants to tell us something beyond what it says, beyond the fact that it's divrei koshes, something else. Now, so in order to know what it means, we find that it has to, at other places it means these three. And we look further in the psukim, we see that he did those other two. So Mistama, that's what the Torah wants to say, Yigash. So the fact that this answers also the word. The Rebbe asked why they say Vayigash Avram in the Dibur HaMaschal, because the whole word is Vayigash Avram. It's Avram's mode. It's not only Vayigash, it's not only teaching. Normally we learn in the beginning of the sicha simple pshat Vayigash. Rashi is teaching. What does the word Vayigash mean? Vayigash means like Rashi didn't have to say the word Avram. Vayigash. Rashi trying to say it's a mode that Avram had in his mind. It's something that he had. So he says Vayigash Avram. So Rashi and the posik since and Rashi quote. The kasha was, why does Rashi have to bring those psukim? Because Rashi wants to say, where do we know that Vayigash includes this? The fact that Torah says later he spoke such a thing, that's not ayah, that was nichnas. So Rashi has to say, we find those. So the Rebbe took shaylas. Why does he bring those psukim? And why doesn't he bring the psukim of where he said it? And both are answered. The psukim that he said is not ayah, because that's not what he's trying to say. He's not trying to say that's what he did. He's trying to say that's what nichnas. It's not ayah from those psukim. And on the other hand, he has to bring this psukim because that's a raya that the Vayigash includes these three things. This will explain the difference between Rashi here says Vayigash of Yehuda means he spoke divrei piyus. Over there, Rashi says in Vayigash that he spoke divrei koshes. The stira. So the Rebbe says like this. Here, this is something that we got to pay attention, but it's very when you finish the whole thing, you see it. The meaning of the word Vayigash El Yehuda is the Mavana Aposhet. Simple pshat. He went away, moved away from the place where he was standing together with his brothers. The Nigash Viskara for Yosef, and he got closer. He approached Yosef, got closer to Yosef, to speak to him privately. As he said to him, he said, I want to speak something in your ears. So he wanted to say something quiet. So what did he do? He was standing on the side with all the brothers. Yosef was here, and he wanted to speak to him. So Vayigash, he moved over, he approached. There, Vayigash itself doesn't need any pshat. By us, Vayigash is a problem, because it can't mean kipshut he approached, because he was standing there. But over there, it's poshet. Umash, so then, how does Rashi bring any raya from there? Rashi wants to bring the Vayigash here, means the Vayigash from there. But there it doesn't mean that. There Vayigash doesn't mean divrei piyus. Vayigash means poshet that he walked over. The Ma'al Rashi maybe kan raya mezeh shagoshas Yehuda hois lepiyus. When Rashi brings a raya that by Yehuda it was he got closer to lepiyus. Ein kavanose shedomu hadodi v'tech mashtevas vayigash. Rashi didn't mean that the vayigash here and the vayigash there has the same meaning. Over there it's divrei piyus, so here it's over divrei piyus. Hainu shegama gdashos shehuda inyonet nu nafshis. That when it says vayigash means he got himself into a mood, like we say here, kmei vayigash Avrom. Rashi doesn't mean that, because over there, when do we teach vayigash means the mood rather than the physical approaching? When you can't say it means the physical approaching. That's only by us. Over there you could say it. So that's the portion of Sheh. Rashi is not saying vayigash means he went to speak divrei piyus. What Rashi means is hamatorachasi. The goal of what vayigash is could be the same goal as there. What was the goal of Yehuda? Shenigash v'yiskadef el Yosef b'dei lafaisa. He went closer to Yosef to appease him. So there, vayigash taka means he approached, but just like we see over there, he approached in order to appease him. So the vayigash here, so here it's taka extra because, and it means benefesh, but the matorah could be the same. Rashi, even though over there the vayigash means kipshutei, Rashi could still bring a raya from there that vayigash means to piyus. Because the bottom line is that the Torah uses the word vayigash, and it was lepiyus there. Rashi learns that came over to appease him. So what do we see from there? That the word vayigash could be used for piyus, even though the taich over there means physically. What's the chilik that vayigash means in the mind, in the feeling, or vayigash means kipshutei? The bottom line is from there we see one thing, that the Torah uses vayigash when a person wants to be mafaya somebody, appease somebody, will use vayigash. Now some places vayigash means he got close to gashmi, some places it means he's in his nefesh. But over there it also means lapiyus. Rashi says here, when he got close to him, his purpose was lapiyus. One shayla the Rebbe asked, why doesn't Rashi over there say that vayigash means lapiyus? Because this idea that he was going to appease him, that you don't have to, Rashi doesn't have to say, you see it. From Reish's Varashol Yehuda, how he started speaking. Look at the first words. What did he say to him? Be Adeni, please my master. Isn't he speaking nicely to him? So it's different piyus. Rashi doesn't have to say. Like I never said before, by us also, if it would be just Rashi trying to tell us that he spoke different piyus, Rashi wouldn't say anything. Look in the psukim and you see he spoke different piyus. By us, it's a different thing. Rashi wants to say that the chatchila he went into for that. That's not over there. That's over there. We see he spoke different piyus. And it starts with the word vayigash. So Rashi says it could be here too. So over there, it was for piyus. And later on in a separate piece, Rashi writes, and the words when he said to him, don't be angry at me. Rashi says, he says that from here we learn that he spoke to him harshly. So stated to what Rashi said, Piyus. Rashi doesn't say that he entered with that kavanah to speak harsh. But like Pirish, Rashi doesn't say vayigash of Yehuda shenichnas lepiyus l'davar koshes. Over there, what happened actually, we see he spoke piyus and he spoke divrei koshes. We see that he started over divrei piyus. So the way the Rebbe learns what happened there, he went over to him to speak divrei piyus, but he didn't plan to speak divrei koshes. And then, as the conversation went, he got into divrei koshes. So what Rashi says that from there we see that he spoke koshes. Yes, Rashi says he spoke koshes. He did. What Rashi is trying to bring from there, what he says here, is here we see by Avram that he entered in order to speak divrei, all these three things, and by Yehuda it wasn't like that. Now, who knows? Maybe Yehuda, who knows what went in the mind of Yehuda? Maybe Yehuda planned to speak first divrei kosher, then divrei piyus. How do we know now? So that says, because to say that you plan to speak two ways, chidushu, that's a chidush. Normally you plan in one style. But you have to have a proof that went in l'chatchila for that. Because the parsha say, like in our parsha, they see for Torah, vayigash Avram. By us, the Torah says an extra word to teach us that he vayigash. Over there, the vayigash doesn't teach you that, because vayigash means pasha kipshutei. So how do you know if they went in from both? So he took it in. So look in the psukim. He started off, the way he started off, that's what he went into. Then we know he also spoke divrei koshes. So the raya from there is that the word vayigash is an expression used Even if it means kipshute, that you got closer, an expression used when you're planning to do piyus. So here also it's piyus, but here it means that l'chatchila enter that, because here the word vayigash is extra. So it's teaching you that, and vayigash can mean kipshute. But over there, vayigash can mean kipshute is very good. He got close to him, and he spoke to him divrei piyus. And then he changed, and then he added, and he spoke divrei, Rashi said he spoke divrei koshes. So really it was both. Why doesn't Rashi over there say divrei piyus? He has to bring a raya. The Pasuk says divrei piyus. V'adaini. But yes, Rashi has to bring a raya, because we're not saying that what he spoke. Rashi is saying what he planned to speak, what he's nichnas. So when you look back at the Rashi and you look back at the Shailas and look back at the words of Rashi, we see everything fits mamish in Rashi. There was metaik in every little bit of Rashi, and it fits like a puzzle. Then the Rebbe continues. Me'enyonim the yena shel teira Rashi. Yena shel teira. This is the Rashi. Someone wants to add something. So the nyonim of yena shel teira.
Can I ask something? It's not punct Rashi. It's just. But I'm trying to say. Normally, it's not. Isn't it? It's usually you try to bring fire someone. If they're not going to listen, then you're going to start with the milchama. It's interesting that how do you start with milchama? You say, I'm going to fight with you. If you don't want, then we'll try to daven to you. I mean, it's not the normal order of doing things.
Sometimes it's like that. Sometimes it's like this. It's not always the same. Since and in the Chassidus, we'll see that's why you did it, because it was such a. It's al Chassidus, but you'll see it's such a matzav that if you look at the situation, it's mamish when you have no choice. When you're pushed to the wall, you start l'chatchila with Muhammad. And then maybe you soften up and you soften the guy up, you speak softer. But this is the case, as the Rebbe was saying, the Chassidus, but it's negated to the Pshat also, that this was already planned. The Eibishter was doing it, was going to do. And Avraham Avinu wanted to save Sdom at the last moment. So he felt there's nothing I could do. I just got to go fight my hardest. So he planned, but he planned l'chatchila. If my fighting my hardest is, could maybe a piyus will work afterwards better. But there is such a thing as sometimes starting the other way. And well, not. And maybe that's like why the Torah wants to tell us that normally you would think that if anything the other way. So the Torah says, no, here he felt, but in the Chassidus Rebbe brings it out clear. So it says like this: Yedu Hashem midasa shel Avram hi Avram eyav. Even though Avram is midah is Avram, the one that loves me. Avram is midah of av chesed. But he said to Mo, it's not understood. Eich yitochen she'Avram yidaber koshes. How could Avram v'chal speak koshes hard today? A nice person, the Baal Chesed, speaks nicely. Just speak koshes. And not only that, the Yisera Mizu, we call Gimel Dvorim, out of all three that he planned, Muhammad, Pirus Tefillah, his Chil Avram Medaber Koshes. He started with Divrei Koshes. Shemizem Muvim, that we understand. She'af Shelachol Eila Nichnas Avram, even though he had in mind all of them, he planned to speak all these three styles. The main thing is, the first thing is to speak harsh. If he's a person of Av, a person of Chesed, he should start with nice being piyus and tefillah, and then if you have to, kosher, so maybe, but not to start with it. So the kasha is B'chlal Avraham would not speak kosher, certainly not to start with it. Ulam Abir was that answer is like this. When we say Avraham, his midas Av Chesed, it doesn't just mean that his natural midah was a midas of Av, which is true. It is. That's right. But it's not only that. The word rak is in parentheses. It is take chesed, his midah was chesed. Shoyanete lechesed inside the tevesh. He always was leaning towards chesed because that was his nature. Ki'im, when we say Avraham midah was ave, chesed means be'iker mainly ezeh she'ovat es HaKadosh Baruch b'midas ha'chesed l'kaim rotzon Hashem. Avraham only cared about rotzon Hashem. So whatever is good to fulfill the Eibishter's rotzon, someone who has ave to the Eibishter will fulfill, always looking to fulfill the Eibishter's rotzon in the best way. That's an ave. When you love the Eibishter, you'll do everything to do what's good for the Eibishter. And what it means is, we'll see in a second, and if the person sees that the only way I could work is by speaking harsh, so the one that has ave will speak harsh. Someone who doesn't have ave, good, so it won't happen. But someone has ave to the Eibishter, he wants for sure the Eibishter's rotzon should happen, and no matter what it'll take. So sometimes if you see that it's the only way you'll do it, so because you have ave to the Eibishter, that's why you'll do harsh. Because he's dakes had ave, and still, and he came to save people. And it was not the Eibishter had a svara. Let's see, maybe I should make the gzeira. It was there already. more. HaKadosh Baruch Hu sholach hamalachim lahapach his name. He already sent him to change, to turn over his name. Like it says, the Eibishter, he said, I wanted to tell Avraham. Why would I want to tell him? I will cover what I'm doing, not what I plan to do. What I'm doing, in other words, there's a mamish, it was, what did they say? How is it called? It's called the 10th hour, how the 11th hour, I don't know which expect, 12th hour maybe. In English, there's when it goes to the last minute, it's where Pirish Rashi saying the Rashi is in the beginning of the parsha yet. That when he sent the 3 malachim, echod lahapich hasdaim, he was already sending one to do it, not going to now investigate and start doing it. Now, if it's held so late and so strong, ein derech ela litvei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now there's no other way but to demand, so to speak, from the Eibishter. Daber koshes, speak hard, v'kdei levatel gzeirazu, to mevatel. And therefore, leyosa Avraham avinu shum cheshbenis, he didn't make any cheshbenis, v'nichnas tekev, he went straight in, b'chol tekev, very strong, b'midah adrusha, v'isa show whatever was needed at that time, af shehei pachtiv, it's against the physical nature, the daber koshes, afilu kapeh shema HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He decided to speak harsh even to the Eibishter. Ula yatzilan shazdeim v'ameira, maybe he'll save them. Comes to save somebody, so even Avraham, and he saw that's the only way he could start. He did it. It's all written in the Torah, which is a hero Avraham, which is a hero to all the Yidden, to the children of Avraham. And what's the hero? When it comes to Inyan, to save a Yid, whether it's to save his nefesh, the Gashmis Pasha, or to save the Beruchnius. And saving Beruchnius means lekarev libam shel Yisrael avin shavashamayim, to lekarev the heart of Yidden to the Eibishter. Osir lelachshev cheshbenis v'chol. You can't make cheshbenis. Is it nice to speak that way? Is it not nice to speak that way? And it's tzorich lisasik b'zeh b'chol keicha. You have to do in your whole keiach gam be'eifin shu heipachtiv, even to do something that's against your nature. Af ledaber koshes, speak harsh. U'lishtadel b'chol ha'emtsoyim ha'afshorim, to try everything. Is it the b'chome and the piyus and the tefillah? To do everything. Now, Avraham wasn't talking about Yidden, but we're talking everything in its level. By Avraham, to save people was something. By us, it's more saving Yidden, but the lesson is the same. When it comes to Atzolos Nefoshes, then whatever is needed, even if it's against your nature. Now, the main thing is to accomplish. So, I got to do everything, true. But I'll do whatever I can. Who says you have to be it with a ganze chayas? Who says maybe you do what you can, but don't put yourself into completely. Rashi says, you got into it. You have to enter yourself in this involvement, this activity. Then he's guaranteed that he'll be matzliach in Aveda. I'm thinking, even though Avraham Avinu was not matzliach, but that's because it was good, I guess. But by Yidden, the Rebbe says, if you do it and you put yourself in, you'll be matzliach. And don't care of what it is, whether it's politically correct or not politically correct. You got to do it with the gans and the shaman. Okay, this is the sicha. Okay.
Yasher koyach.
Thank you.
Beautiful pshat.
Yeah. It's nice is when you look back, after you know the whole thing and you fit into Rashi, you see how every word is doing. This word, lahachni, calls a hichnis versus Agasha. It's an upshat. There's no meforshim say this pshat that this Rashi is not trying to tell us what he did. And it's taki kapila. Why did Rashi tell us what he did? Look later, you'll see what he did. Now you have to go to the other places. Vayishlach, where Rashi says he went to give a present. Why does Rashi do it there? Why can't he over there also look? So every place you have to have an explanation. But here the explanation is that it's like he went into it, he planted it, which means like he made a cheshbon in his mind. I'm going to do everything in my power to save these people. And he felt that the first thing is to go hard, and then you could soften up, and you could even daven.
What you said by going Yidden, Avraham Avinu was matzl every person. He didn't look at Yidden.
That's why he tried.
Yeah.
But he wasn't matzliach.
Yeah. Listen.
I'm saying maybe by Yidden, by Goy, lavdaf kiku matzliach. You have to try it. You have to try. But by Yidden, you're guaranteed you'll be matzliach if you put yourself into it.
Shkoyach.
Yeah.